surely we are not worshiping the same Jesus if this is how you feel about this religion.
For me, there's no one correct religion.
They brought the gospel to us. It was not a thing that we had.
How do you, as a Christian of African descent, negotiate with the history of your religions? Churches do a lot of good. However,
what I believe, you might not believe in that, but that doesn't make me bad or you bad. You're listening to Two B's in a Pod, and I am Bilola.
And I am B. Leonga, and this is a podcast about the immigrant experience in the U.S., discussing our takes on various topics,
including negotiating cultures, fitting in, staying connected, learning and unlearning the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Today, our episode is titled Losing My Religion, and Bilola and I are going to be discussing our journey, our process, deconstructing from Christianity, which I have definitely talked about on the podcast before. I don't know if you have mentioned it, but that's what this episode is going to be about. And I just want to, give a brief introduction, right? It's not going to be us just talking about how much we hate Christianity. Like, that's not what this episode is going to be about, right? If you want to hear me, bashing Christianity, you can send me a DM and I'll leave you a voice note. But that's just, that's not what this episode is going to be about. It's more about asking questions and, hopefully asking questions that you can ask yourself and that we will attempt to answer. So as usual, we'll start with an icebreaker, and this one is Bible themed, right? To stay on theme of the episode. So what is your favorite unhinged Bible story?
And so just to be different, because we already talked, we said most people talk about Job, which is fairly unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
But I would go with like the Bible story about the 10 plagues, where we end up with the last plague was killing all the firstborn sons. Like, what was the reason? That's what I want to know. What was the reason for that? It's hard to reconcile. Like, adults do something and, God is mad at them and is taking out on like innocent children. Children are assumed to be innocent. They can't do. So why are we, if you and I have a problem, why are we bringing the child into it?
Yeah.
It's the way that I look at it.
I agree. And I feel like that's not the only place that happens in the Bible where it's like they're killing the child as a punishment for the parent. But it's like, why is the child in it? But I think it's more of this, we have to think back to the culture, right? At the time when these texts were being written, it's like, they said firstborn son specifically for a reason, because it's about like your lineage and, a child was not just a child, right?
I get it, but I'm just saying, if you offended, why don't we just take it out with the offended party?
Yeah.
Like we talked about David, little lustful man setting up somebody to be killed to take his wife. Why couldn't they just settle their beef? Like,
yeah.
Entre toi et moi. Why are we bringing?
Yeah, I totally agree. But I mean, there's no shortage of unhinged stories in the Bible. But my favorite one, because it's kind of funny. So it's the story is in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 23 to 25. There's this prophet Elisha, and it's been such a long time that I've read the full context of the story, but essentially he's going, somewhere. I think he's in some hostile territory, right? And there's a group of youths. That's what the text my version that I'm reading from, it describes it as a bunch of youths, right? Kids, and they're insulting him, right? And it says there are different versions, but it's basically, if I were to translate it into modern English, it would be like the kids are shouting at him, "Go on with your bald-headed ass," something like that, right? They're basically insulting his bald head. And Elisha gets so enraged that he calls on the name of the Lord and he curses these kids, these youths. It doesn't say how old they are, just says they're youths. And 2 bears come out of the woods and maul. It gives the specific number of kids that they maul, 42 kids. So
just for calling him a bald head. And like, if you have a bald head, why is that insult?
But it's like the story is just so unhinged for so many reasons. Because first of all, what you said, right? Like, why is it? Why is that making you so angry that some kids are insulting your bald head? That's the first thing. Like, sir, you need to control your temper. The second thing is that he's supposed to be a prophet of the Lord. Like, why are you out here just,
raining curses?
You're supposed to be a righteous dude. And then the fact that the punishment did not fit the crime
At all.
Why are you sending bears
to you? Because but I'm still on. But if you have a bald head, why is it an insult?
Oh my gosh! Like that story is so funny to me, and the fact that they specify.
And he called. So wait, when he called on the Lord, so the Lord sent the bears. That's the part I want to understand.
So that's the implication that. For me, that's what the story is saying, right? Because the two bears did not just come out of, like, it wasn't random. It wasn't a random bear. But this is my question, right? Apart from the unhingedness of the story, what were the math is not mathing. Because there are two bears and there are at least 42 kids. Two bears cannot maul 42 kids at the same time. So that how...
I mean, it didn't say how many hours they took now.
But they were not... Some of them must have been running away. Like,
Iron Black... Assuming they're like black bears. Iron black bears, like, strong. Like,
no, you're thinking of grizzly bears.
Oh, I follow somebody on Twitter who is really afraid of bears. I know way more about bears.
No, black bears are smaller than grizzlies.
I read a thing the other day where it was like for one, play dead, for another one, something, and then for polar bears, just say your last prayers. Because
well, I mean, it definitely was not polar bears because this was somewhere in, in Middle East or, somewhere around there. But my question...
Why are you doing math in the Bible? There's no math.
Bible math?
There's Bible math and there's no... Because you've started talking about this and I started thinking, like, so really though, which animals made it on the ark?
That's Bible math, okay? So Bible math is two bears mauling 42 kids simultaneously. Bible math is Noah fitting every species of plant, animal, fungus, bacteria, protozoan, everything onto the ark. But let's...
How did animals that live in... How did aquatic animals survive on the ark?
But they were just swimming outside. The freshwater ones, let's think about this thing because rain, right? Okay, it's a flood. Did the fresh water mix with the marine water? No, it's a valid question. Anyway, I'm sorry, guys. We're already off on a tangent. Okay. Forgive us. So we want to get into the main content, right? I've mentioned on this podcast before that, obviously I, went to a Christian boarding school, but after I left, when I came to the US, I, deconstructed from Christianity. I'm no longer a Christian. And, the same happened to Bill a lot, but probably in a different time frame. But this is not something that's unique to us, right? We're not outliers because studies have shown that in America specifically, more and more people are leaving the church. The most recent study that I was able to find was from 2021, and it said that there was a 21% decrease between 2007 and 2021 from, the number of people who are self-identifying as Christians. And, if you just kind of pay attention to popular media, if you're out and about on social media, you can definitely see that this is the case. A lot of people are talking about, leaving organized religion and specifically Christianity. So why? Before we talk about ourselves individually, why do you think people are leaving the church?
I think people are questioning, and there's so many layers to it where I think it's easy for people when things are dire and things are not going well. Religion is a really, when you don't have the answers and you're stressed, you need something to believe in to keep going. And religion helps. So in societies that feel like there's a logical response or logical solution to a lot of things, then people don't feel the need to tie themselves to religion as much as we're saying Cameroon. You're hoping that, one day the country will be better, they'll fix the roads, there'll be employment, and those things are out of your control. So there's more there's more room for people to hold on to faith and believe that somewhere this person is working to make these things happen for them. I would think so.
Okay. I mean, I see it, right? So you're saying like basically when people feel less in control of
their circumstances,
yeah, then they're more likely to lean more into religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, I agree with you.
I mean, I want to say, like, look at Cameroon today and the Cameroon we grew up with. Growing up in Cameroon, where like the country has more or less gotten worse.
Yeah.
We had just like, we primarily had the main Judeo-Christian, Catholic, Presbyterian, Baptist, sprinkle of Full Gospel and Seventh-day Adventist, but we didn't really have Pentecostal churches as a thing growing up, like when we were much younger. They started coming up like in the late 90s, 2000s. And now when you go to Cameroon, they're just like everywhere. There's so many people going there. But I think that there's a correlation with things getting progressively worse and these churches feeling a need.
Yeah.
Like it's a market that needed, there was a gap there and they're filling it in a way that the others did not.
Yeah. So I was like, hopelessness is increasing. Yeah. And also you talked about market. It's a business, right? And people have realized that business opportunity. But to your point, that business will not be flourishing if people did not, feel that need to go there. And I think we mentioned this in another episode, how like you go home and inside the quartiers, like there'll be 2 apartment buildings. In between, there's a church, so it's definitely something that, just anecdotally, like I've noticed over the years as I've been going home.
The lens people are willing to go. There's this one church. It's on the outskirts of Douala. I don't know how people come because I've never been there in the morning whenever their service starts. But a few times where I've been in Cameroon, coming back from Boya, maybe around 4, that's when church gets out. It is so far out of town that no random taxi is driving there for no reason. So people have to walk quite a distance until they get to where there's life and population, and then they could possibly get. But it's like, think about the fact that people are willing, and if they're getting out at 4, what time did they go? When did they start? So if it's spent all day and they're willing and they're going, it's packed. It's a lot of people doing this every Sunday.
Is it like one of those Pentecostal
churches? It is a Pentecostal church.
Okay. I will give the Pentecostal churches this. They are very entertaining, okay? You ain't falling asleep in those churches, I'll tell you that much.
You have not met people who...
So, we have talked about, our early lives, like boarding school, but wanted to talk specifically about, our religious upbringing, right? So I grew up in a Christian home. My mom is Baptist. My dad was Presbyterian. And we did go to church with my mom, but it was just kind of a thing that you did. And then obviously when I went to boarding school, I've talked about on, how it was very like, there was a lot of religious emphasis on, religious behavior and this kind of indoctrination that now as an adult, I do not appreciate. But something happened when I started going to boarding schools, that when I would come back home on vacation, my parents didn't make me go to church. And I had no willingness to go to church. Like, I believed myself to be a Christian back then. And I don't remember the excuses that I was making in my head. I was probably telling myself like, well, I'm in school for 9 months. I go to church there every day. So surely I've made up for this time when I'm on vacation and I'm not going to church. But in retrospect, I really appreciate that about my parents, that even though they themselves were churchgoers, they never said anything, disparaging to me about, they never insisted. It was just like, at some point they didn't even ask. It's like, okay, we'll be back. And then they come back and we go to lunch. So I definitely appreciate that. But when I look back now, that's kind of
very different.
Where my deconstruction had already happened, because outside of boarding school where I felt that pressure, I had no desire to go to church. So that's kind of my backstory before I came to the US.
So were you the only one? Like, did your siblings go and you were just the only one who didn't go?
So my memory is really like failing me now, but you have to remember there was not a whole lot of overlap, right? Because I went to boarding school and I was in boarding school for a couple of years with my older sisters. One left. We only overlapped for 1 year. And then the others, one of my sisters, she came to the US like, before graduating from SECA. So I didn't overlap with her too much. And then my other sister, I really don't remember, but I want to say they were probably on and off. I don't know that they went more frequently than I don't know. I just know that, especially when I was the oldest one now in the house.
Yeah.
I was definitely not going. Like when I was in high school, I was chilling on Sundays. Sometimes I would find a church channel and put on like those televangelists, but
Wow. I'm just right. There was so growing up, which is funny, I would say like when I was younger, I got baptized. So I was born and raised Catholic into a very, very Catholic family. And when I was baptized as a baby, but for like the first couple of years of my life, my parents were not very religious. So on Sunday, we went to the beach, we went to Limbe
Ooh.
on Sundays for a while. Or when we lived in Yaoundé, sometimes we had like aunties who would take us to church. So we went to any church that they were going to that week and been to Presbyterian church for a while. And then somebody also used to take us to the pool on Sundays. So when we made the switch, when my parents decided to be mature adults and start going to church on Sundays, I didn't like going to church for a while because they took away beach day.
I don't blame you.
They took away beach day. And then from then on, I was very active in church. I went to Baptist school for 1 year, then I went to Catholic school for a Catholic boarding school for 6 years. And 2 of those years, or maybe 3, 2 of those years towards the end, I was the sacristan, which is like, I worked in the church. I was in charge of like, putting out communion for mass, putting out mass wine. I'm going to call out my friend because I worked with my friend in the sacristy. And this girl, I will not call you, but I know you listen to the podcast. So this is your shout out. She was drinking mass wine. And she told me a few years ago, because she was drinking it so much, it was noticeable. So I used to mark when I pour out the wine for mass, I will mark it. This fool told me that she knew she would erase it.
Wait, so I have a question. Is mass wine just like regular wine from the store that they've poured into the shower?
No. So they sell it, I guess, at like specialty Catholic stores.
Oh, okay.
It is alcoholic. It's slightly alcoholic, but it's mass wine. Actually, my aunt and uncle brought us mass wine this summer. I don't think they knew. And but yeah, so I worked in church. I did all of that. So like, which was funny to a lot of people because even then I was not super religious per se. And typically people who worked in the sacristy or sacristans were typically like super, Jesus is you and I. I wasn't. I was very worldly, but I did a good job. So I was there for a while. And then, but you talking about not going to church, in whose house? It wasn't optional. My brother, you're talking about people who don't sleep in Pentecostal church. I'm sure it's just because nobody took him there that he's not sleep. Because like when we got in the car to go to church, he was like, chirpy, talking. As soon as we got to mass, like by introductory prayer, mass has started noising. And by the time they were doing it, he was out. And he would sleep through mass, which would upset my parents so much. But as soon as he got in the car, he was awake. He was ready. Like after mass, to go buy bread and go home. He was good to go. And we went to the same boarding school. He slept in church so much, they made him a church warden. Oh, because that way he didn't sit down.
Yeah.
So he was in charge of like waking people up who were sleeping. So yeah, like because in hindsight, I'm like, if he was sleeping so much, like we should have just left him at home. There was no
Yeah,
point.
what's the point?
It was because he got nothing out of that experience. Um, but yeah, even when I moved here, I would say I was on and off in church, and then I got very active in church, like my young adult years, my early 20s. I was super active. There's a Cameroon Catholic community in Houston, so I was like I used to sit, everybody knew I sat in church. I sat in the front row. I read in church. I was counting money. I was like there. And what happened? I don't know. Life.
What happened though? So there was no like canon event. There was no like trigger, or it was
There was. I think in 2016, it was a collision of things. In 2016, I read a bunch of books. I'm going to say Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi was one of them.
Mm.
I had a thriving book club at the time, and I think just reading a lot of those books, which were primarily like African historical type fiction, and just reading and thinking back on like what, and I always wonder what pre-colonial, pre-religion, like what African traditional societies look like pre-religion. And then we know what happened in 2016 with that election. And people who were looking at this man who won, who was like a philandering, gambling,
bragged about sexually assaulting women.
And evangelicals were looking at him like, that's our guy. This is the Messiah and the second coming. It just didn't sit right with me. And then I would go to church. It happened before, but I think at that point it was just like, if this is the Jesus you serve, I don't want a part of it. Mm-hmm. Because you would go to church sometimes, and during Mass, in Catholic Mass, you give a sign of peace and you shake hands with people. And you would see people actively avoiding, they don't want to touch you. And it was just like, what are we doing here? Like, if this is the way that people feel about, like, surely we're not worshiping the same Jesus if this is how you feel about this religion. And I'm just like, this is not what my ancestors were here for. So maybe it's time to find something else, because this does not seem to be working. And then in 2016 also, there were a few, like, I think that was the year there was like maybe Alton Brown in New Orleans. There was the Philando Castile in Minneapolis. There were all these shootings. And it was like there was pressure on the church to say something. And it felt like they did. And it's like, whose side are you on? So yeah, 2016 was the year that everything fell apart at the same time.
And the thing about Donald Trump, right? And how, American Christians just rallied behind him. I remember not in 2016, but when he was running again against Joe Biden, and Paula White, she held this prayer and she was calling, and I'm quoting, right? She said the angels from Africa. She was calling on angels from Africa to come and help Donald Trump win the election. So aside from what you've already said, how this man clearly does not embody any, Christian behavior, right? He has spoken, disparagingly about immigrants, about,
everybody.
Women, very
disabled people.
Yes, made fun of disabled people. So it was baffling. I'm with you. It was baffling how people who call themselves Christians will be siding with this man. But the fact that, Paula White, you're calling on angels from Africa to come and assist in the election of a racist white man in America, like, what the angels from Africa got to do with it?
And this is after he said shithole countries.
Listen, so I'm definitely, I'm with you on that. But, I have thoughts about, white Christian nationalism in America that we'll not even get to, maybe we'll get into in this episode. But yeah, so did you stop believing in Jesus as your savior? Or,
I mean, in hindsight, I feel like I want to ask myself, like, what did I believe in to begin with?
Right.
because I always look at people who are like very proud and declaring their faith. And yes, I would go to church and I believed in these things, but when things are bad, it's like, but for real, though, where are you? I also remember saying prayer as well, trying to convince Jesus to change his mind and see my point of view. So that's probably a red flag. And it wasn't, even to this day, I don't know if I would say that I stopped believing in Jesus or what I believe in. I might not even be able to define it. I just know that I think deep down what I would like to believe in and practice would be what my ancestors practiced before, because I don't like that everything that belongs to us was villainized and is bad and is of the devil. And so have I made more time to look? I mean, the information is hard to get considering we come from an oral history society. So it's hard to find books because then you're like, who wrote it? What's the intent? But if I could find something, I would I go by, do right by people, respect people, respect everybody's choices, be kind to people, do right. And I mean, sometimes my morals are fluid, but for the most part, it's just be a good person. Because there are people who are Bible thumping and other things. My sister and I always joke that like once a Catholic, you're always a Catholic. And there's certain things that I go by, like helping the less fortunate. And so, which is why my spirit and prosperity gospel are always at loggerheads, because the way that I was raised is if you have more, give. But in our capitalistic, or prosperity gospel, is like, God will bless you. And I always ask that, so these poor people who have been coming to church every day and tithing and doing everything, is it because they have done something or not done something?
We're definitely going to talk about prosperity gospel and tithing specifically, like in a little bit. But for me, I feel like once I left Cameroon, right, and I was out of the clutches of boarding school and that kind of religious pressure, it unraveled naturally. Because again, maybe I was never really a Christian. I don't know, because the speed, like I said, if I didn't even want to go to church when I was on vacation from boarding school, and then when I came now, the speed with which I just, abandoned everything. And I think fundamentally for me, like my worldview, this is how I think about religion, right? Religion, every single religion that exists and has ever existed, is just people trying to make meaning of life, of the universe. So for me, there's no one correct religion. Sure. Because religions are invented by people. We created our gods, right? We created our gods to explain, natural phenomena, to explain life, the universe, to have hope, right? Yeah. So I think that to be a Christian, you have to believe that Christianity is the one true religion. And I just don't, fundamentally in my being, apart from all the other problems I have with Christianity, just fundamentally, I don't believe that as a person, that any one religion explains, the meaning of the universe. So that's the first thing. But then as I started developing my, feminist thinking and, kind of grappling with how Christianity has been used as a tool to oppress women for centuries and centuries. And I just could not reconcile those two things. And I could not see myself, continuing to identify with that religion. And then, to your point, like you, as I started learning more about our colonial history and the part that Christianity played, not just in Africa, all around the world. Yeah. In, really stripping people of their culture and aiding in colonization. I couldn't reconcile. Not just,
I don't know, we're having a conversation at Christmas and that we started talking about the Portuguese. I don't know why we're talking about it. And that's when we're reading and Tosin found out, like, he started looking up and he was like, oh, the Portuguese came to Africa in the 1400s. I'm like, yeah, they were the first ones there. I was like, in Cameroon, we do know that because that's how we got the name Cameroon, which is, Rio dos Cameros, which Cameros is prawn. And there were a lot of prawn in the River Wuri, I guess, apparently. Mm-hmm. And so but the Portuguese were the first to conquer the world and they went everywhere. The first missions, Vasco da Gama and them, were sponsored by the Roman Catholic Church. and they started taking slaves.
Mhm.
And they were in the slave trade business when people were colonizing, it was not their prerogative because they were making money off of the trade of human beings, and they were not in a rush to take any land because that was what. And if you think about it, they were in China, they were in Latin America and Brazil. There's nowhere they did not go.
Mhm.
And all of this started because they went conquest sponsored by who? The church.
Yeah. Christopher Columbus, like when you read some of his, I don't know if it's journal entries or letters that they have from him, this man was a Christian. Like he truly believed that the things that he was doing, as horrible as they were, he truly believed that he was doing the work of the Lord. Like when you read his writings, and then you read like again letters and journal entries from officers who served under him, and they even back then they were like, this dude is fucking crazy. Like he is so cruel. He is, killing and maiming people, but he legit like thought that he was doing the work of God. And I know that he was not unique, just like you said. All of these, quote unquote explorers, these, colonists, these slave traders from early on, like they were there with their Bible, and they're gone.
Always. Always.
So that brings us to the next, like segment. And I really want this, like I said, to be more like a question and answer, and some of them will be rhetorical questions. So we've talked about slavery and colonization. So Christians of African descent, then, how do you negotiate with that history, right? The history of this religion that you belong to. How do you negotiate with the fact that it was so fundamental, right, in facilitating colonization? It was used to justify slavery, literally from the Bible, because in the Bible, slavery is endorsed. The God of the Bible, in several places, tells his people after a war to take slaves. There are laws in the Bible talking about, how slaves should be treated, the terms that they should serve depending on their ethnicity. So the Bible does not mince words about its endorsement of slavery, and this was used in the justification of the transatlantic slave trade, So my question, which we'll attempt to answer, but I want the listeners to ask themselves, how do you as a Christian of African descent negotiate with the history of your religion? So I know that when you asked yourself this question, it led to your deconstruction, but how do you think a Christian of African descent negotiates that? Like, how do they reconcile that and stay in the religion?
I don't think you can't. I think that if you think about it, you have to give that one up to somebody, just take a pass, because there's no way. And like I said, that is something that I think that's one of the things that really hit me, because I was reading all these different things. Maybe I might be wrong or right. There's a picture of, whenever we talk about colonization, I feel like the person who does not get the roses with all the thorns that he deserves is King Leopold. Because the things that he got away with, and I just feel like he goes under the radar. Nobody, they don't talk about him, and they don't talk about him enough in the way that he deserves. But I saw a picture of a child who was being amputated because the father did something, and the people doing that, one of them was reading a Bible. And it's like, how do you justify, treating other people like that when you're reading the Bible in the New Testament where it says, love your neighbor like yourself? How do you justify doing all these things to people? In the US, the Deep South, which is the Bible Belt, is also the same place where slavery was at its biggest, and people were willing to go to war to make sure that they did not end slavery. So it's like, how can we be upholding this thing that I wouldn't want to believe? Like, if somebody was really wicked, right, and doing all these things to me, I would not want to be like them. That's the way that I look at it. Mm-hmm. Is it too simplistic? I don't know. But I just feel like these people who did all these things to us, and then they told us that this is the way, the truth, and the light, and we're holding on to it so much. I always ask people, they brought the gospel to us. It was not a thing that we had. They told us how everything of ours was bad. And you had people literally changing their names. They stole our bronzes because they were demonic. Now they're in the museum. And did all these things. And then today you have the descendants of these people. A lot of them are not going to church. And we want to re-evangelize them from this thing. How do you explain that? And nobody has ever really answered. So I'm also throwing this out to a listener. If you can help me break that down, because that's something that I think about a lot. How do you reconcile these two things?
So I'll tell you what I hear or see more accurately in my TikTok comments, because I made a couple of videos where, not talking about this specifically, but where, I've talked about, I told Joseph Merrick, right? We have excerpts from his diary. He was a missionary who set up the first Baptist mission in Cameroon. And it was like a series of videos where we were talking about the early missionaries. And this is what African Christians have said to me in my comments, right? They always have the same response. Those people were not real Christians. I hear it again and again and again. Those people who held, yes, we know that slavery was bad, but listen, those people, that is not Christianity. So this is what I hear from Christians of African descent all the time. They will separate the bad actor from their religion. They'll say, no, this is just somebody who is using the name of Christianity, to do harm. And I understand, I get what they're saying, but 2 points. Like I said before, slavery is endorsed in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, tells his people to take their war captives as slaves, including sex slaves in the case of women and girls. In the New Testament, there are several passages talking about how slaves should obey their masters. So you cannot really make that argument that, oh, these people were bad Christians, because slavery is endorsed in the Bible, right? That's one thing. And then the next thing is that, how long can you make that argument, right? Now slavery obviously is illegal and everybody agrees that it is an abhorrent practice. But back then, there was a significant, if not a majority, of the Christian population that thought it was okay. So are you still at that time going to say, oh, all of these people are not Christians? At some point, you cannot use that argument when there's an overwhelming number of people of that religion who believe this thing. Then at what point do you separate the people from the religion? Are the people not the religion?
I'm also struggling with that. They were all bad, or they were not real Christians, because the Christianity you have came from them. And so they were the people. We did not have Christianity. They brought it. It did not exist. This version you're practicing did not exist. So how do you... It's not making... I don't understand it.
Yeah. And let's just dispel this. And I know that, all of our listeners have this knowledge. I would hope they do. But another thing I've seen on TikTok, there's this popular video going around of this African man. I don't know what country he's from, but he's saying that he's a Christian. And he's saying that, oh, people say that Europeans colonized us and brought us Christianity, but Christianity existed in Africa long before. And let's just dead that right here. The places where Christianity existed in Africa prior to European contact were Ethiopia and other small pockets in North Africa, such as in Egypt. Another thing I hate is when people are really dishonest like that. Like, no, let's stop it. If you are not an Ethiopian, or again, somebody from those other small pockets of North Africa, if you are a Christian of African descent, your Christianity came to you via colonization. And I'm not saying this to invalidate anybody's religion, right? I don't think that it is necessarily contradictory for a person of African descent to be a Christian. You can, but you cannot deny the history of your religion, which I feel is what a lot of African Christians and Black Christians try to do. They try to do this mental gymnastics to try to deny the facts. It's okay. Like, there are other religions that came to people via colonization, including Islam, right? In northern Cameroon, a couple of centuries before the Christians came, they were having a jihad up there. And that's how those people became, Muslims. So if your religion came to you via colonization, that doesn't mean that, it's invalid for you as a descendant of those people, but it's just this denial of history is what really kind of gets me, riled up. But again, we want to hear your thoughts on that. So this next one is a little bit more, I don't know, tricky. I'm going to ask you first. Is it possible to be a feminist and be a Christian?
I feel like you'll be fighting for your life at all times. I think that you have to constantly rationalize things because the way that it is set up, it's not really set up for, I mean, I don't know. The way that it is in popular culture, I cannot quote verses because I know that people always say like, you're supposed to submit to your husband. Although I think I've seen the full verse is like, everybody's submitting to each other, not in the way that they make it seem. But I think it's also helpful to talk like there's religion and then there's also doctrine in certain contexts. And I think a lot of it is a doctrine where you constantly have to be fighting because it's like traditionally women do not have a place in Christianity and or even in Islam today, like women still have to go through the side door. So it's like there's all these things where if you want to go from a basis of, we are both equal, you'll be fighting for your life. You could explain it away, but every now and again, there are things that will pop up and you have to be ready to either rationalize it or fight through it.
Yeah. And I mean, if you are a feminist and a Christian and you're listening, like I would really love to know your thoughts, right? And I bought this book on the recommendation of one of my favorite Bible scholars. The title is The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. And I thought I was going to enjoy this book. I'm a third of the way through and I'm struggling to read it. Have you ever read a book and you are shouting, right? You are shouting because I talked about mental gymnastics and I want to be really respectful to this author because, she's a historian and she's a professor, but there is a lot of mental gymnastics to me going on in this book, right? The full title is The Making of Biblical Womanhood, How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth. So she's a feminist. She's a Christian feminist. She's the wife of a pastor. And she's trying to make the case that this lesser role, this doctrine that, the man is the head of the household and the woman is supposed to submit to him and women are not supposed to be leaders in church and all of this that we know, right? She is making the case that this doctrine is a modern thing and that fundamentally Christianity is not a patriarchal and misogynistic religion. And like I said, she's doing some extreme mental gymnastics to justify that. She is trying to paint even Paul. She's trying to make him out to be this kind of radical, person who believed in equality of the genders. And she does. I mean, if anybody's interested in reading this book, I would love to discuss it with you. But it is insane mental gymnastics. And like I said, I'm a third of the way through. The only convincing argument that she has made in this book is kind of what we were talking about earlier, like with slavery, right? She says that, okay, the Bible endorses slavery, but today we all know that slavery is bad. Christians agree that, slavery is abhorrent, everybody's equal, no race should be, subjugated to the other one. So she says that if Christians can negotiate that, right, they can kind of rewrite the rules of the Bible. Why can they not also rewrite the rules of the Bible that says that women are less than men? Which is a valid argument, right? Because there are many things that are in the Bible that Christians simply don't do today because A, they disagree morally or it's inconvenient. Like last time we were talking, you mentioned the mixing of fabrics. Yeah.
I just thought about that because I was like, yeah, all the Christian influencer girl is showing us their Shein hauls. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. You're not supposed to mix fabrics. You're not supposed to
bake unclean animals.
Shellfish. There's rules and rules and rules. A lot of them are in the Old Testament that Christians today don't practice because it's impractical.
But they still read it though.
See, maybe they can answer that question for us also. And then there are things that are impractical, and then there are things that are immoral, like the slavery, right? Like there's, and I don't have the verse right in front of me, but it's along these laws again that says if a woman or a girl is sexually assaulted, an unmarried woman or girl, she has to be married to her abuser. So things like that of course Christians today don't practice because they agree that it makes no sense. So in this book, the author is saying that, okay, you guys have negotiated all of these other things. Why do you continue to hold on to these things that say that women are less than, men? So that is the only thing that she says in that book that I agree with. But everything else, to me, again, it's mental gymnastics, because the origin story of Christianity is fundamentally misogynistic. What's the story? Why did Christ have to come and die? Because we are sinners. Why are we sinners? Because, what do they call it? The creation myth of Christianity, right? And I'm not using myth in a disrespectful way. I'm just using it in, like origin mythology. God created Adam and Eve, and they fell into sin because the serpent told Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. She ate, and she gave to her husband Adam. So it's already blaming a woman. The origin story of your religion is blaming a woman for the fall of man, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know how, again, as a feminist, like you can kind of negotiate that away, because that's already the foundation for me. And I would love to hear from Christian feminists what you think about this. What do you think about the origin story, right? The original sin. And then this is going to sound ridiculous, but I think it's a valid point. Why is your God identified as male?
Nobody has seen him.
But we say he.
Yeah, true.
We say he, and he had a son.
Not a daughter.
He didn't have a daughter, right? So for me, those are kind of fundamental questions.
Yeah, and it's almost like, this is not maybe Bible, but the thing of, when women have cramps or something, it's like punishment for original, or like labor pains or something. Like, why are you punishing? Well, I was not there. Like, we were not there. Why are you punishing all of us till today? Like,
we're the daughters of Eve.
Why are we justifying? And then it's like, the Proverbs 31 woman, and like, I've not found the description of the man and what he's supposed to be, other than like he leaves his father's house. And, sometimes people say, I saw somebody using this once where they were talking about last names, taking last names. And he said, he did not say that the man assumes the woman, so she takes his identity and takes his name. So the two become one. So how about you either choose a name that you use together?
But that taking the last name thing is from
Victorian, isn't it?
It's from women being treated as property, right? Yeah. That's essentially where that tradition is from. And then another thing that in this book, the author, Beth Allison Barr, she tries to make the case that for its time, Christianity was this kind of radical religion that was, egalitarian. And I will give her this. There are things that have been changed in the Bible to make it more patriarchal and, misogynistic. But I think fundamentally it still is. So her trying to say that it was this kind of radical new religion, when there are religions that predate Christianity, where, first of all, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they are the minority in the sense that they are monotheistic, right? Most religions that exist and that have ever existed are polytheistic. And a lot of them have male gods, they have female gods, yes. They have gods that change gender. So Christianity really was kind of, I don't see how she's making a case that it was radical in that sense, where it's like, okay, you only have one God and it's a male God. Like, what are you talking about? So kind of following along the lines of women, then I'll ask again, is it possible to be openly queer and be a Christian? And I'm saying openly queer, I want to clarify, a person who is out of the closet and accepting of themselves, right? Because there are people who are queer and they're, they have not come to terms with that.
I mean, I've seen I think maybe it's like Episcopalian female priests who or ministers, are they priests? I think they're priests or ministers who
Yeah.
are women and they're queer and I would like to know how they balance that. I think every time I've heard of, particularly in the Black Pentecostal evangelical churches, every queer person says they are not they are no longer, because I think Donnie McClurkin talks about how he used to, but he prayed the gay way or something similar like that.
So speaking of Episcopal, right? When I went to the Houston Pride Parade last year, they were in the Pride Parade, like the Episcopal Church, and I forgot what their banner said, and I sent it to my sister because she goes to that church, and it said something like the something affirming Episcopal, and I was super impressed. I did not know that there was like a denomination of church that is that accepting. But yeah, no, they were there. They were in the Pride Parade. So some of them are quite progressive, but I don't know exactly how they preach around that.
I know that they have ministers who are, I keep saying ministers or priests, I don't know which one they use, but I know that they do have queer ministers in their church. That's the first one that came to mind, because I think it only happened recently, like maybe in the last, since I've been in this country, when they became more accepting. I've noticed in the Midwest where I am, maybe just like in the major city, but I've noticed a lot of churches seem to be accepting. I don't go there, so I don't know what they do indeed, but like you'll find, everybody's welcome. They will have like pride flags and Black Lives Matter in a lot of the churches that I see driving around.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't go to church, and probably Texas is not the place where you would see that. But I do follow some ministers on TikTok who, they do preach about being, they're accepting, and it's kind of, I think this is the philosophy that they follow. It's like what I was talking about before. It's like every modern Christian today, whether you admit it or not, you're not following everything that the Bible says. There are things that you have discarded because we are
all wearing polyester.
Yeah, they're either impractical, immoral, or you recognize that they don't apply to this day and age. So those ministers and those congregations who are queer accepting, I think that is their philosophy, is that it's all good and fine. The Bible says this, but we are allowed to negotiate that because we have negotiated all of these other things. So why not this? We recognize that there's nothing wrong with being queer, so we're accepting. But of course, the majority of Christians do not. They don't think that.
I mean, the Catholic Church is bracing. I feel like in this lifetime we are going to see people leaving the Catholic Church to start some other version of the Roman Catholic Church, because Pope Francis recently said they were going to have queer ministers or priests, and the girls are in a tizzy. But if we consider that the Roman Catholic Church in the US is plagued by pedophilia in a way that the church in other places is not, it might be for the greater good of mankind. Because like I always tell people, like, for somebody, I spent a lot of time in and around the church growing up. I can confidently say it. I won't want to say quotes me, that the church in Cameroon has its own problems with priests, and it's not pedophilia. It is philandering. It is. I had a classmate whose father was a priest.
Wait. Her father was a Catholic priest, or his father was a Catholic priest? Aren't priests supposed to be celibate?
Did I just tell you that quotes me, priests, like, because again, priests are like revered where we come from, right?
Yeah.
They don't really engage with, mass servants engage with the catechist. All these other things, like the priest is not hands-on running the day-to-day. There are other people to do that.
Yeah.
So, like I said, quotes me, the priest in Cameroon is the CWA that you should be worried about. It's the older women. That's their problem. I know like I said, I know somebody personally. Well, this priest has passed away now, who was a priest. I know of other people who have conceived with priests.
Okay.
And like this person that I knew, like they only found out when we were like maybe Form 3 or Form 4. They all their life they told them different versions of like where their father was. And he was conceived when his father was still in the seminary, but he went on to like be ordained a priest, but the relationship did not end.
Oh.
And so part of and I know this because I love my dad, but my dad like loves the tea and insisted on giving it to me. Even after he was born, you know, his mother's parents were very like, obvious for obvious reasons. They were like, stop this thing. They insisted, and I think in Cameroon, many a time, if you see a priest in an urban area and they send him somewhere remote, he probably did something as punishment. Like a lot of the time, when they send a priest to a really remote area, it's like punishment for something. And so they sent him to a remote area. They did not stop. She went against her parents to go visit this man, and on her way back had an accident and passed away. And no. I think that just added to the layers, and that's why they would not tell him.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of friends with him. And so I start talking to his father. I don't ask why. I don't even know how I entered. So this priest calls the house one day, and I think he said his name. So I get on the phone when I finish, and my mother says, "Why is a priest calling you?" And this years later we talk about, she said I was so nonchalant. I said, "It's my friend's father." And I walked away.
Wait, so the priest knew that you knew that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So she said she called my grandmother because she said they didn't give her this part in the parenting booklet. She does not know how to handle it. So she confronted my grandmother. And I don't know, they agreed. So they told a priest who was a family friend. So he comes to visit me at school and he pulls me to the side, like we're there with his nieces, a bunch of us. He pulls me, he's like, "So, what is this thing you said to your mother?" I said, "Babe, this is his father now." He said, "So who knows?" I said, "I think this person, this one."
Like it's common knowledge.
I don't know if it was. So he's like, "Can you not discuss it with anybody else, please?"
Or
so I don't even know. Like when I think about it, I'm like, yes, I knew he was a priest, but it was his father. Well, it didn't. I was not ashamed. I wasn't, like,
you were not scandalized.
Or maybe it's because my father was also there giving me details. So it's like, this is normal now. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it was a secret.
So, but the thing about, you made a point about them moving the priests to remote areas as punishment, right? And that's funny in the context of what you're talking about. Them, not here. Them having, relationships with grown women. Obviously, I don't think priests should be celibate. Let them do what they want. But in the US,
that's the difference.
There was, and I don't know, I mean, obviously they did the expose about the US. I don't know if it's happening in other Western countries where, and this is one reason why I despise the Catholic Church, because these priests were abusing children for decades and decades. The church will find out.
And move them.
They will not
alert them.
They will not turn them over to the authorities, right? They will basically blackmail, offer them money to the family, and then move the priest somewhere else. So it's like, this person is harming children, and you're not going to fire him. You want to save face.
Excommunicate him for starters. You don't want those people associated.
Can you imagine?
It seems in Cameroon they've removed a priest for less. When he was saying that he was a Pentecostal Father 18 or something, he was having visions. They banned him from saying mass just for that. So, and I don't know why, like, I don't know about in England or other countries, but I don't understand why the church in America did this. Like, is it American code? Like, what was the reason?
But I don't think it was just capped at the American, whatever you call it, right? What do they call it? The diocese?
The different dioceses. But it's like a lot of different dioceses in America.
But that's what I'm saying. It must have got to the Vatican at some point. Don't you
That
think
they
so?
knew.
Yes, I think the Vatican knew, because you cannot have a problem on that scale, and the people at the top, the Oga at the top, does not know. They must have known.
I wonder how much. I'm not making excuses. Because it's a scandal that we all know about. So what did they do from the top down at the time that they discovered? Because even till today, we are still learning stories of like what happened and other things that happened. So I don't understand. But I always like to tell people, not as a defense, to say that because the Roman Catholic Church is so big and America is America, this is the scandal. I think that when we go to different pockets, there's different versions of the different scandals in places.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. But back to the question, right? Is it possible to be a feminist and be a Christian? Is it possible to be openly queer and be a Christian? I'll, let the queer people answer that. But I'll say this back to women. There's a school of, I don't know if they, call themselves feminists, because I know that a lot of Black women don't like that term. By the way, I disagree with that. White women don't own feminism. So I get where people are coming from when they associate it, but I feel like, nah, like, fight back. But anyway, what I was saying is that there is a school of thinking, right, among feminists or womanists or whatever we want to call them, who just fundamentally believe that it is against women's best interest to associate with Christianity. Like, for them, that is the ultimate liberation. For women, to reject the church. So this person's not a feminist, but she said something that made me laugh. Do you know who Shira is? Sprinkle, sprinkle. So she's this dating coach who, to me, she gives a lot of bad advice, but her whole platform.
Please, have you ever heard a dating coach that gives good advice?
She's basically using empowering in air quotes. She's empowering women to demand more from the men that they're dating. She's one of these people who is like
divine femininity girly.
I don't know that she uses divine femininity, but she's basically saying, like, women should not date broke men. They should. She's one of these.
Kevin Samuel. She's Kevin Samuel.
She's one of these extreme, like, the man should be the provider. If he's taking you on this kind of date, you should refuse. So I disagree with a lot of things that she says, but one day she was on live, right? And she's reading the questions and comments, and somebody asked her, Shira, are you a Christian? And without a beat, she said, no, because I could never worship a man. The way I screamed, I said, Shira, this is the only thing I've ever said that makes sense. Like, it was so funny, like the way she said it, just very matter-of-factly. She's like, no, because I could never worship a man. And it's back to a fundamental question that I asked before. Why is your God identified as male? And my answer is that because he was created by men, for men,
true,
to uphold men.
True.
So that's my answer. But I'm curious what the girlies have to say. And I'm asking this with all of their respect, right? I'm not, disparaging or bashing anybody. But if anybody wants to take a stab at that question, that is my answer. Okay. So earlier you mentioned prosperity gospel. Mm-hmm. And for me, prosperity gospel is what happens when capitalism and Christianity have a baby. It is the child of capitalism and Christianity.
I want to say, because like we're talking about like market share opportunity. So I guess that's the capitalism aspect, because I think that is like, it's a niche where you saw the opportunity for desperation and an opportunity to capitalize on people's desperation.
Mm-hmm. But
at the end of the day, it's all about the Benjamin. So yes, it is capitalism having a child with religion. What the influences are will be the desperation. So yeah, you are right.
Yeah, because I mean, it does prey on hopeless people, but I feel like it's so common now. There are people who are very well off who subscribe to prosperity gospel,
because they believe that they tithed and they got it from their blessings. there's so many things about prosperity that's just even beyond the prosperity. There was a thing, like somebody suffers something, an accident or something. And the first thing is like, I'm so blessed that it didn't happen to me.
Oh, I hate that.
It's such a like, do you think that this person did not pray enough? That's why it happened to them? Or just, but my big issue with prosperity gospel is just like, prosperity gospel thrives in communities and places where there's despair. Like, it's with the people who don't necessarily have and they need, and that's where it really thrives.
My problem with prosperity gospel is that ultimately it's blaming poor people for their circumstance. Mm-hmm. And maybe not even only poor people, ill people. Because what is the teaching of prosperity gospel? It's saying that essentially you can, if you are a good Christian, if you pray,
you have to sow a seed,
and you give, materially.
You sow a seed. They don't use such language.
Okay. You sow a seed, quote unquote, aka giving materially to God via the pastors. How convenient. But anyway, if you do this, then you are essentially blessed. Right? You're essentially blessed with wealth, good health, and all of this. So they believe essentially that,
you buy it. Essentially, you buy your way into good life.
But when you look at it on the surface, it might seem innocent, right? Just saying, pray for this, pray for wealth, and you will get it, and sow a seed and all of this. But then what does that say about the people who are struggling?
And have been struggling for 30 years as members of your church.
Does that not mean that then there is something faulty with their faith?
Yeah.
Or maybe with their works, as Christians call, their behavior, their whatever, right? It's essentially blaming poor people for their condition. And then you could extend that to anything, to people who are in chronic illness, right?
Where's your healing? You've been going to church and your healing is not coming.
Because if your gospel is saying that do this and you'll get this, if somebody does not have this thing, it means that they did not do something. And that's my issue with it. And then I agree with you that it preys on people. That was that pastor I just showed you the video.
Which one? Mike Todd.
Yes. There's a video of that guy. He is, what's his name? Mike Todd, right? He's on, giving a sermon and he is telling, preaching about why it's important for his congregation to give. To give money. And he's essentially bullying his congregation, saying, how can you expect God to bless you when you are being stingy with God? And this man is standing on a stage. He's wearing what appears to be very expensive jewelry.
They've priced that. There was a TikTok account pricing their items now.
He's wearing an off-white sweater.
They always wear designers.
And off-white, like the brand, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is a very, very, rest in peace, Virgil. It's a very, very pricey, so you're standing on stage in your designer outfit, head to toe, and you're berating your congregation.
It is money for next week's outfits.
You're berating people about not giving or not giving enough. Like for me, there's just something, and I really want to know from the Christians who maybe are part of similar churches and congregations, how does that sit with you? Because if Jesus, if
he came back, he gonna have problems with all y'all, because remember y'all were doing money doubling at the church door.
And he flipped them tables.
I mean, it's the same thing in Houston. Remember during Harvey in 2017 when Hurricane Harvey, and Joel Austin had to be shamed and bullied into opening the doors of his church so people whose houses got flooded could have somewhere. This man said, what did he say that he got flooded? And I said, it's impossible. I've been to that church. It is impossible because it sits very high up. The water never climbed that high for them to, the basement, the garage would have been flooded, but nothing else in that church got water.
I remember.
And why should you have to be shamed? You are sitting there using that building and it's tax-free because, you're a church. You're not paying taxes or anything. You're getting tax-free money every week, and you cannot help the less fortunate.
Yeah.
In crisis.
I just, again, if we look at the Jesus as described in the Bible,
he will not recognize the church that is here today because it's all vibes.
I don't think he would be a capitalist. You
No.
know, I don't think he would be wearing off-white and jewelry. And, you know, and I'm not saying this to judge, like, okay, you people should go and be impoverished. Everybody likes nice things.
Please,
But
I was raised Catholic. They said that you are taking vows of poverty and a servant leadership, you lead by example. And poverty is like, the flashiness is not really the thing that we were looking for, which is what I struggle with. I might not go to church, but to me, it's just like, if you're a preacher, I'm not saying that you should be destitute, but it's just the flashiness and the constant need for material things is not the way that I look at my religious leader.
well, anyway, I mean, I like nice things, so I'm not going to judge anybody.
You are not even going to church, so
Exactly. I'm not going to judge anybody, but I'm just saying that it seems what I have a problem with is trying to shame and guilt people
into giving.
The people who have money, let them give their pastors money all they want. That's fine. But don't go up there and start berating and bullying people and telling them that they're being stingy and they're not being blessed because they're not giving God what is his. Like, let's be fucking for real.
I used to go to Lakewood once upon a time. There are 2 sermons at Lakewood. There's one before offertory. There's like a whole 30 at the time. There was like a whole sermon geared to empty your, relaxing your pockets to give, which is just like every Sunday you have to give and tell people. And I'm just like, it should come from the heart. Like, why is this so much emphasis on? And I'm not, like I said, I'm not judging, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around it because it's like, how are you? It's like, even when I'm giving like charity donations or whatever, I go on Charity Navigator to see how much of the money is spent on overhead and how much is spent on the actual mission. And so it's like, if you're the pastor and you're paying yourself, I don't think that, like you said, capitalism, this is no way, you're not here for profits to be making so much money when there are literal people in your congregation you are taking money from to get these things. Like, shouldn't be a loop of let all of us making it work for everybody. I don't know, but I'm not going to be in anybody's building anytime soon. So I'm going to sit this one out. And if this is your thing, please help me understand.
Yeah. Just because he has been trending in the news, you want to talk about your fave?
No, because where do you start and begin? Like, I'm going to say that the first time I ever saw him in person was at Lakewood. That says everything that you should know. Like, they're 2 sides of the same coin. They're like pastors, but a lot of the money, they write books and they do all these things.
TD Jakes.
Yes.
You saw him at Lakewood?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
It was crossover.
A collab.
Yeah. And he was at Lakewood. And so it's like they make a lot of money. They would say that they don't make, it's not from tithes, right? It's from books and it's from recorded sermons. But who's buying it?
So if you're not aware, TD Jakes was trending in the non-Christian media spaces recently because, this whole thing came out about P. Diddy being an abuser. And then TD Jakes, I guess I don't know if he's friends with P. Diddy, but I've seen a picture of them together. And allegedly, TD Jakes used to go to P. Diddy's parties.
Allegedly.
And, of course, with all that we have heard, P. Diddy's parties were places where,
orgies, allegedly.
And listen, if TD Jakes is listening, as long as everybody in that orgy was a consenting adult, I love it for you, sir. I love it for you. Where we don't love it for you is if there were minors there or if anybody was, made to do something against their will. Anyway, these, kind of mixed rumors came out about TD Jakes. And then I watched the video of him recently. He was giving a sermon, obviously it was some Sunday recently. And he was saying, he was denying the allegations. But then he goes on to say, even if I did it, all I have to do is ask for forgiveness because that is what the blood of the Lamb is for. And that really disturbed me. There's something very disturbing about that. I don't know.
I've heard a version of that before, where there's a pastor who's caught in some mess and immediately they said they have grace because they're covered by grace or something similar.
I find it such a disturbing, and of course, again, I want to emphasize that he was denying the allegations, but then to add that, even if it's true, I'm covered by the blood of the Lamb, and all I have to do is ask for forgiveness.
It's giving a little bit of guilt.
It's not only giving guilt, but
it's also very arrogant.
It's
because it's just like, okay, even if I did it.
Sir, you're being accused of abuse. What are you talking about? Like, why are you being so nonchalant? I don't understand.
Because he knows his congregation also. I don't, there was somebody told me about a sermon where a pastor was saying, like, even if he did something, he knows that his congregation will not believe and they will, pay for something. A lot of them they know their congregation, they know their congregants, and they know the hold that they have on
this is true, right? And I really hate to be talking about TikTok again, but clearly my life revolves around this. There was an attorney, no, she was a prosecutor, and she was talking in a video about how when she would have men in the church who were accused of abusing, younger people, right? So child abuse essentially, and she would be going to make the case against him to prosecute them. The pastors of those churches used to call her and say, oh, he has asked for forgiveness, he has changed his ways, asking her to drop the case. And she said it used to get to the point sometimes where they would send their congregation to harass her. Mm-hmm. To protect abusers. And this is something that not just in the Catholic Church, there was another expose done on the Southern Baptists where youth pastors were rampant abuse. And this is my problem with not just Christianity, but these huge organized religions, is that it is just a safe space for abusers because you put these leaders, and most of the time it's men, you put these men in places of power where they have access to victims and then
coerce them.
They coerce them. And then even when it comes out, people
make excuses.
Yeah, people defend them.
Touch not my anointed.
It's like that's another like huge problem why even after I left, I mean, this happened for multiple reasons, but even after I left Christianity, I don't ever see myself going back to any other organized religion, just because when you just dig a little deeper, there's abuse in all of these places. Every single one, anywhere that you have people in power, and particularly men, there's abuse happening there. Every religion, everyone. There are stories I've heard about Buddhism, and every religion you can think of.
Ooh, what's that one I watched? There was this one on Netflix. I have to look for it.
Was it a cult or a religion?
It was a cult.
I love me some cult documentaries.
No, they were wild.
Okay, so to wrap it up, right? What are your current beliefs? Like, are you just floating?
I would say that I'm floating. I'm probably floating somewhere between, like we're talking about, agnostic and like nihilism, because I sit firmly in the territory of we're all going to die and everything is nothing.
But we're going to die now. What will happen after that?
So that's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I think the nihilism comes in, because I'm always thinking about just like death, we're living, like all these things that we're doing. Recently what I got into, I'm like, all these things that you're doing, right? Like, you buy a house, you're so proud of this house you bought, you're taking care of it. You might leave it to children who don't care. As before they have even put you inside the thing, they're calculating when they're going to list it because they don't care. There are not a lot of people that are going to be remembered 2 generations down. So all these things that we're doing in life, you say you're building legacy. We are not, listen, the Rockefellers and Carnegies of this world, it's not many. Not that many of them. A lot of us will be forgotten. This is me going off tangent. It's where I just come back to like everything is nothing. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I think the only thing that I think grounds me is just trying to be a good person, be kind to others, help people when I can, where I can, and be considerate. Like, what I believe, you might not believe in that, but that doesn't make me bad or you bad. Respecting everybody and respecting their values, as long as they're not hurting anybody or hurting me.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I don't think that you need religion to be a good person. I think we've seen many cases where religion causes people to be the worst version of themselves, whether that is starting wars or,
Yeah, yeah.
like, yeah. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. It's like, you don't need religion to do the right thing.
My friend says that a lot of people are shooting case Christians.
Shooting case.
They don't necessarily, he doesn't think they believe in it. But should they die and it was, religion was right, then, they're covered. But it's not. But just in case. So like they're doing just enough where like if heaven and hell and all those things are real, then they're covered by their belief. But it's not that they really believe, it's just in case. And I said, you know what, you're probably onto something because there might be people who have these similar questions. But if, something that has been drilled into you over and over, it's not easy to just wake up one day. If you're not a nat, you don't question things and you just go and go and go. Mm-hmm. And think about the society in which we were raised, where it's just everything we're told to do.
Yeah.
Especially those of us who went to boarding school, we're sheep. They tell us when to wake up, tell us when, there's a bell. And think about it, there was a bell for everything. What is a lemming? We're just following. And we don't necessarily question anything. Mm. And so to start questioning, it's not easy to just start questioning when you were not conditioned to question. You were conditioned to follow the rules.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people are uncomfortable with where you are, right? Which is just saying, you know what, I don't know. I don't know the answers. And, being fine with that, because for some people, if they question and then they leave that religion, there must be something else, right? So it's uncomfortable to just be in that space. And then I'm going to be honest, I feel like I disagree with your friend who thinks of the shooting case. I think there are a lot of people who don't even think about the afterlife and they're just participating for the sense of community.
True.
Because as much as, the church has many, many problems, it does provide community. That's one of the very few things good that I can say about the church is that, it does provide community. Yes. So I think that there are people who are there, have put aside those questions because the community is more important, right? The family and,
especially, so like, I would say like, especially in the South where, for Black families, the church was everything.
Yeah.
I saw a tweet recently, people were sharing, like, even them being able to get athletic scholarships or summer enrichment programs. Yeah. Like, there was never a time, like, if there was a cost and their families could not, all you had to do was go to the church and it's like, say less. And church people, when they are determined, mm-hmm. they would get it done. And so for a lot of kids growing up who could not afford, say, like tournament fees for like different sports, the churches were what signed them up into these leagues and took them. And so without church, it's almost like, where do you find this community again for yourself and for your children, which is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I will give. And this church right here across the street from my house, it's certain one day of the month, they have a food drive. So those are things that, and they do a lot more in the community, right? So those are kind of things that within their immediate community, churches do a lot of good. However, the other things,
the other side of the coin.
Yeah, the other things that are happening, the ostracizing gay people, the abuse that is being covered up, these other kind of things, for me, it overshadows the good. But I definitely see why, there's definitely community there. I'm not going to downplay that part. So for me, I definitely think I'm an agnostic in the sense that I don't think like I said in the beginning, there's no answer, right? We don't have the answer. I'm not denying the existence of a greater force.
Yeah.
The explanation of that force as given by the Bible for me is unsatisfactory, because it's based on a patriarchal structure and it tells me as a woman that, I'm a second-class human being.
Also fairy tales. Somebody said that the Bible is the biggest fairy tale. And what we don't realize is like even the way that it's organized and arranged, it's not necessarily in chronological order. It's just like the order in which people saw fit, maybe for the most impact at that time. And then like you hear people arguing about the King James version, there's actually a Catholic version of the Bible. It has extra books.
Yeah.
And those
the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible also is different.
Those are my favorite. Those books that are not in those are my favorite. They were really nice stories. Sirach had so many stories with like anecdotes and lessons learned from. I don't know why they didn't include them, because they used to be at some point and they were taken out. And so it's just like, it feels like a work of fiction.
But for me, that's not, I don't think that makes the lessons less impactful.
No, they're very valid.
Yeah.
My favorite Bible as a child came from Jehovah Witness Church. My book of Bible stories. Did you ever have that?
No, my mom used to drive away those Jehovah Witness people when they would come to the door.
I don't know where my mom bought it, but it was like the best. It was like for kids. It had graphics with Bible stories, and so it was like, the story of Delilah and Samson, the plagues. It's just like, and which to this day I can remember some of those pages and those stories just because of like that vivid imagery.
Yeah,
but
no, I agree with you. Right, I don't treat the Bible as if so I'm going to say this. I've learned a lot about the Bible since I started taking more of an academic approach. The Bible is very, very interesting if you really take it for what it is and you just put aside this notion that it is quote unquote the word of God. There are so many things you learn when you listen to Bible scholars. For example, the Exodus, as described in the Bible, the overwhelming majority of Bible scholars agree that that is not historically accurate. The Exodus, as described in the Bible, there's no archaeological evidence to support it. Like, it's just not supported. So
it didn't part the Red Sea.
I'm not even talking about that part. I'm talking about like the amount of people that they're describing who were supposedly enslaved in Egypt and then left. The Bible scholars are like, no, this is just something that they made up to fit a narrative. Like, so you learn things like this. And if you're open to not being offended, I really encourage people to like, just take an intellectual curiosity. The Bible is really, really interesting. And to your point, how the texts were selected to be in the Bible, how they have been changed. Why did this translation, get chosen over that one? Yeah, I don't, put any stock in the historicity of the stories in the Bible, but I think some of them are useful as moral guides. But I'm not necessarily floating. I've found a home in New Age occultic, which is not a religion. It's just kind of a spiritual practice, right? I do a lot of astrology because I'm just curious about the universe, and astrology just adds a mystical aspect to the science of astronomy, which I find astronomy to be interesting. So, and then I use other kind of new age things, but yeah, I'm very okay with saying that I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm learning about different spiritual beliefs, but I don't ever see myself joining another kind of organized religion for the reasons that I said before.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this because I follow some teachings in this community, the manifestation girlies, as I like to call them, these kind of new age, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
The manifestation girlies, I'm going to be very honest. They are just prosperity gospel preachers.
Yes.
They are prosperity gospel preachers without the Christianity. The manifestation girlies, some of their teachings are harmful. No, it's true, because some of them are teaching the same thing that says,
everything I have for.
Yeah, if you can manifest anything that you want if you put out good energy. So what are you telling the poor person? What are you telling the sick person?
Clearly my energy
is
not good.
It's like they are responsible for their situation. So these kind of new age teachings, I take them in moderation, and I take them, my sister and I were talking about this, like there are those teachings apply only to privileged people.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge that as I adopt those practices, because I can say, oh,
manifested this thing.
I manifested this thing. I was telling my sister, she was laughing at me. My job that I got last summer, I did a ritual. The weekend before my interview, it was a full moon in Sagittarius. I did a ritual.
Outside?
Yeah, yes, I was outside under the moon. I did a ritual, and this was summer of 2022, and I got the job, right? So my sister was laughing at me because I was telling her that I did this ritual and I got the job. And I'm saying it, but of course I recognize I was not somebody that walked off the street with no knowledge and they just gave me that job because I did a ritual. No.
True, yeah.
I was qualified for the job. So it's that kind of thing. Like I do these things. It's more of a mental,
true. Very true. Yeah.
I'm not going to go to a destitute person, a poor person, and tell them, hey, if you do this ritual that I did, you're going to get a job. No, because that would be very irresponsible of me, because I recognize that I have the privilege to use these things and to say, okay, I got this because of my positive thinking, because I manifested it. So I take those things with a grain of salt, and that's why I'll never preach it to anybody seriously. Like, everybody should find that thing that works for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listeners, we want to know your thoughts. I want to hear particularly the points that we discussed, right? From Christians of African descent, from feminists, from queer people. The question we're asking is, how do you negotiate, or how do you reconcile not only the history that Christianity has done, the harm that religion has done, and in some cases that it continues to do? How do you reconcile that and remain, in that religion?
And if you are on this side of the heathen fence,
I'm not heathen too.
Or if you're not, you used to be identify as Christian and now you're floating or just asking yourself questions, we'd also like to hear from you and share, if you don't mind sharing your stories on how you got to where you are today.
Yes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please give us a 5-star rating and review us wherever you're listening. Please, if this episode offended you, don't review. Don't review, I beg. Just come to our DMs or our comments and insult us there.
And until next time, any man for himself, God for you.
Literal translation, everybody for themselves and God for all of us. So I think that is very apt. I don't like that saying because it is kind of selfish, but I just thought it was.
It's just boundaries now.
Oh, you see, like boundaries.
Kind of like any man for, I use it sometimes, like when you're trying to tell somebody something and it's like my version of if you like it, I love it. Like if I'm telling you something, at the end of the day, any man for yourself, you're gonna do what's best for you, and God will take care of everybody. So
okay. And I guess if I can reinterpret to fit this episode, right? Any man for himself. So everybody believe what you want.
Yeah.
And God, if there's a God out there, they will be for all of us. Hopefully. Or some of us will find out in hell.